안녕하세요. 뉴그랜드입니다. 본 영상은 제가 요즘 영어 공부하면서 계속 시청하고 있는 데이비드 루벤스타인의 인터뷰 영상인데요. 데이비드가 인터뷰하고 있는 존 알로드는 무려 10년 동안 연간 수익률 100%를 넘겼다고 하네요. 데이비드도 칼라일 그룹의 창업자로서 굉장히 유명한 투자자인데요. 이 둘이 대화하는 것을 보면 너무 재밌더라고요. 그럼 시청하시고 한글 자막 보면서 따라 들어보세요.
So I was always interested in business and always interested in trying to make a dollar. My parents used to ask me, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I said, I want to be a millionaire when I'm 30. Right? And they said, no, that's not a job. Right? Like, what do you want to be? There's a confidence level that's required to say the market's wrong, because the market's usually right. Right? But there requires to be humility of saying, sometimes I'm wrong and the market's right.
When people talk about legends in the finance world, they're talking about investors like John Arnold. Famous for running a book that raked in hundreds of millions of dollars as a natural gas trader at Enron, Arnold earned a reputation as something of a whiz kid in the volatile energy markets, given his runaway success before he turned 30.
I started getting a lot of calls from people saying, Enron went down, there must be a lot of opportunity in this space, can we invest with you?
The native Texan learned how to capitalize on the markets at a young age when he traded baseball cards in the early days of the internet.
I could see hockey cards are more valuable in New York than they are in Houston or Dallas, right? And so I can buy them here, send them up there, and there's a geographic arbitrage.
He graduated Vanderbilt a year ahead of schedule and started working at Enron, eager to make a name for himself in the business world.
They called me right before I graduated and said, hey, we've had a couple people leave our oil trading group. If you can start immediately, you can get in there. And I said, well, I graduate in 2 weeks. Then I got the weekend, I'll be there 17 days.
After Enron, he struck out on his own with Centaurus Capital, an energy-focused hedge fund that boasted compounded annual returns north of 100%. But after 10 years running Centaurus, Arnold retired.
Yeah, it had been the only thing I had done professionally. So I started when I was 21 years old. I was now 38. My life had changed.
Since then, Arnold has kept busy. He joined the board of Meta, lending his energy expertise to help address big challenges like the data center infrastructure needed to meet the growing demands of artificial intelligence. And then there's his philanthropy. John and his wife Laura are prolific philanthropists. Together they run Arnold Ventures, a 100-person philanthropic firm that does work in areas like higher education and criminal justice.
We wanted to do this while we were living. We think that part of the role of philanthropy is to be on the cutting edge, is to take risks that either the private sector or government is either not willing or incentivized to take.
John Arnold is one of the legendary natural gas traders in our country's history and also a legendary philanthropist. So, John, can you tell us how you became such a famous trader in the energy world? Is it math? Is it hard work? What is it that takes to be a great trader?
I think, at least for my style of trading, there was a number of characteristics that I thought were important. One was having this right balance between confidence and humility. Right? There's a confidence level that's required to say the market's wrong, because the market's usually right. Right? But there requires to be humility of saying, sometimes I'm wrong and the market's right. And if you don't get those in balance, then you're going to blow up very quickly. I think another trait from good traders is almost this detachment from emotions. And so there's this phrase that fear and greed determine markets, and those are two very strong emotions. And I've seen traders who, when they're in that high-stress period, either because of fear or greed, they change their pattern, they change their process. And so for better or worse, I think I'm classified by being able to be detached from my emotions.
You're from where originally?
From Dallas.
Dallas. Okay, and your parents did what? Were they energy traders or?
No, corporate lawyer, my father, and my mother was a teacher turned accountant.
And as a boy, you traded baseball cards.
Yeah. So I was always interested in business and always interested in trying to make a dollar. And so, the baseball card craze kind of coincided whenever I was in my mid-teens, kind of 14, 15, 16.
All right, so you went to Vanderbilt. Were
Went to
you
Vanderbilt.
a baseball trader there, or were you doing energy trading in the side, or what would you do at Vanderbilt that distinguished you?
Yeah, so I was, again, like I viewed school as a means to an end, and so I wanted to get out early. And so I said, my first semester, freshman year, I'm looking through the handbook, and I'm like looking at the rules on graduation. If you have 120 credits, you can graduate. So hey, I can do this in 3 years. I want to go into the game, right? And the game is business.
What did your parents say?
Oh, they loved it because that was a year less that they had to pay for.
Okay. All right, so
I hope my kids do that.
so Vanderbilt is in Tennessee. So did you want to stay in Tennessee, or do you want to go back to Texas?
So, coming from Dallas, maybe go back a little bit here. My parents used to ask me, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I said, I want to be a millionaire when I'm 30. Right? And they said, no, that's not a job. Right? Like, what do you want to be? I'm like, I don't know, but I want to get to be a millionaire when I'm 30. And in 1989, I'm 15 years old, and Liar's Poker comes out. And this is kind of a very famous book. It tells the story of 80s Wall Street through the lens of Solomon Brothers bond trading desk. And this is like the first introduction I have to what Wall Street is. Reading this book, I'm like, that's where the game is. It's like the Willie Sutton line about why do you rob banks is because that's where the money is. Well, why do you want to go work at a bank? Because that's where the money is. In 1995, I didn't get the Wall Street job. And so the closest thing I got was a job at Enron, which was, was developing this merchant bank around the natural gas industry, which was in a very interesting time in the mid-90s. And I said, well, that's the closest thing I got. I go do that for a couple years in Houston and go back to business school and figure out what I want to do.
Okay, so you joined Enron, which was then a hot energy company. There was a traditional energy company, then became kind of a trading energy company. So did somebody teach you natural gas, or did you say, I want to get into natural gas? How did you get into that?
Late 70s, as many other industries in America were getting deregulated, the airlines, the banks, the telecom, they started doing natural gas as well. And so 78 until 92, there was a series of deregulatory orders that came out that kind of separated the business, and it made the pipelines the natural monopoly, highly regulated, but the pipelines were not allowed to take title to gas anymore. And so now you had these producers here, you had the end users here, and somebody had to put them together. And you need that bank to be the intermediary. It's the same thing that Enron did starting in 1990, and they actually called it a gas bank. And so this was trying to bring some order to this market that had just been a spot market, had kind of no derivatives, no swaps, no forward curve to indicate, to producers or to end users how to change behavior. And so I got put into that division, which was kind of the trading and marketing side of derivatives on natural gas.
So you started doing that. At what point, after you started doing that, do you realize, hey, I'm pretty good at this, or this isn't as hard as they told me it was going to be?
So I got really lucky. I was not supposed to, coming out as an undergrad, I was not supposed to go straight to the trading floor. And so I got into the oil trading group, and I was supposed to do this traditional investment banking rotation of every 6 months you change jobs. And I got on the trading floor, and they kind of just said, you're home here. We're going to move you to natural gas. I went to natural gas after about 9 months and then just never did another rotation and stayed there.
Okay, so you left. Enron goes under. Big scandal. You have nothing to do with that. So you set up your own shop, and you're going to do natural gas trading, as we talked about. Yep. And at what point did people start saying, hey, this guy is really good. I want to give him some money. And did you go on the road to raise money, or it just came in over the transom?
Yeah. So this was a really fascinating story because, at the time when Enron went down, Enron was the largest natural gas trader. I was the head trader at Enron. And so I had a very kind of big reputation in the business. New York Times wrote a story in early 2002 talking about the amount of money that my trading book had made in 2001, which was in excess of $600 million. And so, all of a sudden it kind of validated me externally. And so I started getting a lot of calls from people saying, Enron went down, there must be a lot of opportunity in this space, can we invest with you? And second quarter 2002, there's starts to be a new scandal hitting the papers on Enron almost every week, including on the power trading side. And so, that was a very different operation than what I was doing, but it was close enough to where all the potential investors kind of, stopped calling me back, right? Because they don't know what's going on. They don't know if if my track record was real or not. They don't know, if I'm going to be tied up in court proceedings, for years. And so when I ended up getting started in the summer of 2002, I had $8 million, 3 investors, one of which was me.
All right, so you went forward. Presumably it went well from the start.
Yep.
And you did it for how many years before you said, I've had enough?
So that was 10 years, from
10 years.
2002 to 12.
So if I had invested with you, which I wish I had, at the beginning of your firm, what kind of rate of return would I have had over that 10-year period of time?
So we compounded over 10 years over 100% a year on average.
100% a year?
Yeah. So,
a year?
I mean, we had some years that were 300%, had one year that was pretty much flat, but on average.
100% a year, that's pretty unusual. I mean, okay, wow. Okay, I guess you didn't have to go out and raise money. People just throw money in with a transom. Okay, so rarely do people, as I mentioned earlier, walk away from 100% annualized rates of return. Yeah. Generally, people say, I really am a genius, and maybe I'll let other people share in my genius, and I'll build a $100 billion organization. Yeah. But you just said, I've had enough of this?
There was a lot of things that were happening, right? My personal situation had changed. I got married. I started having kids. We had this fledgling foundation. The markets had changed. So, shale gas really got started 2007, 2008. And so you had a market that had been characterized by increasing demand and higher cost of production, and having to use price in order to allocate the scarce resource, and creating these very large booms and busts prior to the shale gas revolution, to being one where it was kind of in perpetual oversupply and kind of bouncing around marginal cost to produce. And as a trader, this is fantastic. If you're on the right side, this is very boring. The amount of infrastructure that's required to run the data centers for AI is immense. And the industry is under a real challenge. It's putting tremendous challenge upon the utility industry and the electric industry in general.
So you have another new career, which is being a board member of a very famous company. You've been elected to the Meta board, which used to be known as Facebook, and obviously it's more than Facebook. So how did that come about? Did you know Mark Zuckerberg, or did he invest in your fund and he really liked the returns? Or how did you come about? Are you a tech person as well?
I am not a tech person, which made the invitation even that much more surprising. But I had known Mark a little bit, had spent some time with him, and knew Mark Andreessen, who's the longest standing external board member on Meta as well. And I think they were looking for somebody who had some energy expertise. The amount of infrastructure that's required to run the data centers for AI is immense. And the industry is under a real challenge. It's putting tremendous challenge upon the utility industry and the electric industry in general. But the tech platform companies that are involved in AI are really struggling with this. I think my background in public policy is an asset to them, and then my background as an investor is helpful as well.
So do you think AI and the related kinds of things that will come about because of that are going to force our energy system to produce more energy that is really good, than is good for the environment? Or are you worried about the ability to keep up with the energy demands that tech is producing?
Electricity demand is this tension between rising efficiencies on one side and rising GDP on the other, right? And so for the kind of past 15 years, from the mid-2000s to about 2022 in the United States, loads very much canceled themselves out, and you saw flat electricity demand. But that's all changing. It started in 2022, and I think there were three issues. One was this growth in data center that's largely being driven by AI. Second is the reshoring of manufacturing, and the third is the electrification of everything, and so thinking about EVs. And so that's putting real strain on the system with this increase in load growth. And that's now combined with this next tranche of intermittent resource coming on, the wind and solar coming onto the system, and utilities having to try to balance those resources. They're also being asked to decrease emissions in general. And then fourth, there's a lot of pressure on affordability today with all the pressure from inflation. And so I've said that a utility could do, of those four, which they're being faced with all four of them, almost every utility in America today, they could do one or two very easily. I think they could probably do three. Trying to do all four at the same time and maintain this grid and maintain the reliability and affordability that Americans demand is enormously challenging.
So let's talk about energy generally. I know you're a natural gas trader, but you obviously follow the energy markets. So just in case I wanted to put a trade on tomorrow, should I assume oil prices are going up or going down?
No comment.
No comment. All right, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that it is realistic to think that we can get out of carbon in our lifetime in the sense that we get down to a so-called neutrality position, and we really are not adding more carbon to the atmosphere? Is that going to take 100 years, 50 years? Is that realistic, or is carbon so cheap and inefficient that we're really never going to replace it in our lifetimes?
Yeah. So it's very clear, and I think almost everybody acknowledges now that the global warming that's happening is affected by man, is affected by increasing of carbon in the atmosphere, and that there's significant negative effects associated with global warming. So now the question is kind of like, what's the prognostication of being able to meaningfully address it? And it's incredibly hard. The energy system is characterized by very long-lived assets. So if you think about tech, you usually keep your cell phone for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, and then you throw it away and get a new one. If you're looking at software, it updates almost constantly. But when you have if you build a gas generation plant or coal generation plant today, it can last 50 years. And I think people have looked at kind of the growth of EV sales and say, like, hey, look, it's doubling every year. It's 15% this year, and it's going to keep going up, without sitting down and doing the math of, okay, what does that mean for internal combustion engines that are on the road 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now? And that's why this problem is so difficult, is like, you not only have to build new stuff to meet growth in energy demand, which is linked to GDP growth, but then you also have to replace this enormous stock of energy assets.
So, okay, so if you were called by the President of the United States
Yes.
and said, John, you really know a lot about energy.
Yes.
I'm looking for a Secretary of Energy. Would you ever go in and be Secretary of Energy or something like that?
I don't think that my skill set's best utilized within government.
All right, suppose somebody came to you and said, you are a well-known person who's got some money. Texas is a person that likes entrepreneurs. Well, you should run for governor or senator. Would you ever consider that?
That's still within government, no.
Not going to happen. Okay. All right, okay, so that's not going to happen.
I would be even worse in an elected position. I can tell a story about how there's kind of social value in trading. Somebody needs to price and manage risk. That is a socially valuable job. You kind of have to squint in order to believe that.
So at a relatively young age, you made a lot of money by normal human standards. And usually when people make a lot of money, they keep trying to make it and make it. But At a relatively young age, you were a signer of the Giving Pledge, which says you're going to give away half of your money or net worth upon your death or during your lifetime. Why did you decide at such an early age to commit to giving away so much of your money, and why did you actually start giving away gigantic amounts when you're so young? Usually people wait till they're 60, 70, 80.
Yeah, I had started getting interested in philanthropy when I was about 25. And I had this job which, I can tell a story about how there's kind of social value in trading. Somebody needs to price and manage risk. That is a socially valuable job. You kind of have to squint in order to believe that. And I could squint a little bit, but I knew I'm making a lot of money over here. I want to do something good with it on the side. And started getting involved in public charter schools in Houston, which was kind of one of the focal points of the charter school movement early in time. And I was getting more and more interested in that and starting to think about how can you have two schools that are serving the same demographic getting very different results. And so, I started getting deeper and deeper into the ed reform circles. And then along that time, I got married. My wife, started thinking, join me with that. We built this little fledgling foundation. We both had day jobs, and we're kind of doing that for maybe an hour a day. She had the courage to leave her full-time career. She was an M&A lawyer as her training, and left that first and to go full-time on the foundation. And I started getting drawn more and more into it. But I think the question is, why give early? And I think we had the benefit of seeing case studies of, there's been 100 years of large philanthropy in this country. There's been more than 100 years of kind of large wealth in this country. And so thinking about, does it make sense for us to give the money to our kids? And does it meet the goals that we have for our kids to give them a pile of money, especially if they know that pile of money is coming relatively early? And we decided that looking at case studies, sometimes that goes well, but oftentimes it doesn't. And so we didn't want to do that. And then also looked at the case studies of legacy foundations. And so a lot of people, or I guess the nature of wealth had changed a lot from this generation versus previous generations. Previous generations, it was often through an industrial business or some type of retail business where your wealth was tied up in a stock, and it was hard to sell while you were living, or you didn't want to sell while you're living. And so a lot of those decisions were made at death and in the will. And so oftentimes it would be set up as, let's start this foundation whenever we die and have, a friend or maybe a daughter or son manage it. And we looked at those types of legacy foundations and, found a bunch of flaws with them. And so we wanted to do this while we were living. We think that part of the role of philanthropy is to be on the cutting edge, is to take risks that either the private sector or government is either not willing or incentivized to take. And so it's easier to do that as principals and to take those risks than it is with hired staff kind of after your death.
Sometimes when people are ready to get married, they might say to their prospective spouse, I'm going to have a good life for you. We'll have a big house. We'll have some artwork. We'll have planes. We'll have country homes. But did you say, I'm going to give away all this money? And was that a big appeal to say to your bride, hey, guess what? I'm going to give away all this money, so don't think.
We got some of that stuff, though.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So she was okay with it.
We're not giving it all away.
You didn't give it all away. Okay. All right. Okay. So you have 3 children. You and your wife have 3 children. And are they very young, or how old?
They're all teenagers.
And do they listen to you?
Whenever I'm giving them stuff, they're very attentive.
So what's easier, trading energy futures in natural gas or being a parent?
Trading for sure.